$25. That's what Deke Carver paid for a piece of land nobody wanted, a shack nobody would live in, and a future nobody believed in. He thought he'd finally found the solitude he'd been searching for his entire life. He was wrong, because when he walked through the cottonwood trees behind his new property and heard the sound of water moving over smooth stones, he discovered 3 women bathing in the river, their clothes folded carefully on the rocky bank. They looked up at him with eyes that held fear, fury, and something else he couldn't quite name. In that single frozen moment, everything he thought he knew about owning land, about being alone, about what he wanted from life, shattered like glass under a boot heel. The tallest one reached for something hidden beneath her dress. He realized too late it was a rifle, and she was already pointing it directly at his chest. The desert stretched out in every direction like an ocean of dust and dying grass. Deke had ridden for 3 days straight to reach the property, his horse exhausted, his own body aching from the saddle. The man who sold him the land had laughed when Deke handed over the money. $25 in coins that felt heavy in the seller's palm. The shack stood alone against the pale sky, wood weathered gray by sun and wind, roof sagging in the middle like a broken promise. It wasn't much, but it was his. For the first time in 32 years, something belonged to him that couldn't be taken away by a foreman's bad mood or a ranch owner's greed. He spent the first hour walking the perimeter of his land, marking the boundaries in his mind. The property wasn't large, maybe 40 acres of scrub brush and rock, but there was a cluster of cottonwood trees in the back that suggested water nearby. Water meant life. Water meant he could stay. He pushed through the branches, following the sound that pulled at something deep in his chest, the musical rush of a river moving through stone. The trees opened up into a clearing where sunlight broke through in golden shafts, illuminating the water that moved swift and clear over a rocky bed. That's when he saw them. 3 women, waist deep in the current, their hair wet and hanging long down their backs. The sunlight caught on their skin, on the water droplets that clung to their shoulders. For a moment that felt suspended outside of time, Deke stood completely still, his breath caught somewhere between his lungs and his throat. They hadn't noticed him yet. The tallest one was scrubbing her arms with something that looked like dried sage, her movements efficient and practiced. The one in the middle had her eyes closed, her face tilted toward the sun like a flower. The youngest was laughing softly at something, her hand trailing through the water. Then the middle one opened her eyes. She saw him first. Her body went rigid, and the sound she made was somewhere between a gasp and a warning. The other 2 turned as one, and suddenly 3 pairs of eyes locked onto him with an intensity that made his skin prickle. The tall one moved fast, faster than he expected. She lunged for the bank where their clothes lay folded, and her hand disappeared beneath a faded blue dress. When it came back up, she was holding a rifle, the barrel already leveled at his chest with the kind of steady aim that comes from practice, from necessity, from fear that's learned to look like courage. "Don't move," she said, her voice carrying across the water with absolute authority. "Don't even breathe wrong." Deke raised his hand slowly, palms open toward the sky. The rifle didn't waver. The woman holding it stood now in water that reached her waist, her wet hair plastered against her neck, her eyes hard as flint. The other 2 had moved behind her, forming a protective line. 3 bodies between him and whatever they were guarding. He could see goosebumps rising on their arms from the cold water, could see the way their muscles tensed with readiness to run or fight or both. "I'm not here to hurt anyone," Deke said, keeping his voice level and low. "I just bought this land. Didn't know anyone was here." The woman with the rifle laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Bought it? From who?" "Man named Preston. Had the deed and everything. Paid him $25 3 days ago." Something flickered across her face, too quick for him to read. The youngest one, the blonde with freckles scattered across her nose, whispered something urgent that he couldn't hear. The woman with the rifle shook her head once, sharp and final. "Turn around and leave. Forget you saw us. Forget this place exists." "Can't do that," Deke said. "This is my land now. I got papers to prove it." "Your land." The woman's voice dripped with contempt. "You think a piece of paper means anything out here? You think $25 buys you the right to walk in on people?" "I think it buys me the right to walk my own property," Deke said, and he heard the edge creep into his voice despite his effort to stay calm. "I didn't ask for this. Didn't ask to find 3 women living on land I just bought. But here we are." The middle one spoke then, her voice different from the others, softer but somehow more dangerous. "How do we know you're telling the truth? How do we know Preston didn't send you?" "Who's Preston?" Deke asked, genuinely confused. "I mean, besides the man who sold me this land." The 3 women exchanged glances, and Deke saw something pass between them, some silent communication built from years of shared survival. The tall one with the rifle lowered it slightly, just an inch, but kept it pointed in his general direction. "You really don't know, do you?" "Don't know what?" "Preston didn't own this land," the middle one said. Her eyes were the color of honey in sunlight, and they held a weariness that seemed too heavy for someone who couldn't be more than 25. "He had no right to sell it to you." Deke felt something cold settle in his stomach. "Then who does own it?" "Nobody," the tall one said. "That's why we're here. That's why we've been here for 6 months, thinking we were safe, thinking nobody would find us." She gestured with the rifle toward the trees behind him. "And then you show up. Safe from what?" Deke asked. But even as the words left his mouth, he saw the answer written in the way they held themselves, in the rifle that stayed pointed at him, in the fear that lived behind their defiance. They weren't just hiding. They were hunted. The youngest one stepped forward, water sloshing around her knees. "Please," she said, and her voice cracked on the word. "Please just go. If you stay here, if anyone knows we're here, he'll find us. And if he finds us, we're as good as dead." Before Deke could respond, before he could ask who they were running from, the sound of hoofbeats echoed through the cottonwood trees, distant but getting closer, and all 3 women went pale as winter snow. The woman with the rifle moved like lightning. She grabbed her dress from the bank and pulled it over her wet body in one fluid motion, the fabric clinging to her skin, turning dark where the water soaked through. The other 2 followed her lead, dressing fast with the efficiency of people who'd practiced this exact scenario. The middle one snatched up a leather bag that had been hidden beneath the folded clothes, and Deke caught a glimpse of dried herbs and small glass bottles inside before she cinched it shut. "How many horses?" the tall one hissed at him. She had her dress on now, her hair still dripping water down her back, and she'd slung the rifle over her shoulder to free her hands. Deke listened. The hoofbeats were getting louder. Closer. 2, maybe 3. Moving slow. "Scouts," the youngest one whispered, her face gone white with terror. "He always sends scouts first." The middle one grabbed Deke's arm, her fingers surprisingly strong. You need to hide. Now. If they see you here with us, they'll assume you're helping us and they'll come after you too. Who will? Deke demanded. But the hoofbeats were close now. Very close. And the three women were already moving deeper into the trees. Away from the river, their feet barely making a sound on the ground despite their hurry. The tall one turned back, her eyes meeting his with an intensity that made his chest tighten. Man named Malachi Vaughn. He owns the largest ranch in 3 territories. And he thinks he owns us too. She vanished into the shadows between the cottonwoods, the other two following like ghosts. Deke stood alone by the river, his mind racing. He could leave. He could walk back to his shack, pretend he'd never seen them, never heard their story. The hoofbeats were almost on top of him now, and he could hear voices, rough male voices calling out to each other. His hand moved to the knife on his belt, the only weapon he carried. It wouldn't be much use against rifles, but it was something. 2 riders emerged from the trees. They were hard-looking men, the kind who'd spent years doing work that required more muscle than conscience. Both had rifles propped against their saddles, and their eyes scanned the clearing with the methodical efficiency of hunters tracking prey. When they saw Deke, they pulled up short. You there, the first one called out. He had a scar running from his eyebrow to his jaw, a pale line against sun-darkened skin. You seen 3 women come through here? Deke's mind worked fast. These men worked for Vaughn. They were hunting the women by the river. And whatever reason those women had for running, whatever terror lived in their eyes when they heard hoofbeats approaching, it was real enough to make them flee from a man with a rifle despite being armed themselves. Haven't seen anyone, Deke said, keeping his voice steady. Just got here myself. Bought this land a few days back. The second rider, younger but with the same cruel set to his mouth, leaned forward in his saddle. Bought it? From Preston? That's right. The 2 men exchanged glances. Preston's been selling land that ain't his again, the scarred one said. Vaughn's gonna love hearing that. He turned his attention back to Deke. You sure you haven't seen 3 women? One tall, dark hair, one with brown hair and a smart mouth, one blonde, pretty little thing. The description matched perfectly, and Deke knew his face showed nothing. Like I said, haven't seen anyone. It's just me in a broken-down shack. The younger one nudged his horse closer, his eyes narrowing. You're lying. I can smell it. I'm telling you what I know, Deke said, which is nothing about any women. The scarred man studied him for a long moment, and Deke felt the weight of that gaze like a physical thing. Finally, the man spat into the dirt. If you're lying, if you're hiding them, Vaughn will find out, and when he does, you'll wish you told us the truth today. He yanked his horse's reins, turning back toward the trees. Come on, they're not here. As the hoofbeats faded, Deke stood motionless by the river, listening to the water move over stones. He'd just lied to dangerous men to protect 3 women whose names he didn't even know, and somewhere in the trees behind him, those women were watching, waiting to see what he would do next. Deke waited until the hoofbeats faded completely into silence before he moved. The sun had shifted lower in the sky, casting longer shadows through the cottonwood trees. He could feel eyes on him, watching from somewhere in the dense brush beyond the river, but he didn't turn to look. Instead, he walked slowly back toward his shack, his boots crunching on the dry ground, giving them time to decide whether to trust him or disappear forever into the desert. He'd almost reached the sagging porch when he heard footsteps behind him, light footsteps, barely disturbing the dirt. He turned to find all 3 women standing there, the tall one still with her rifle, though it pointed at the ground now instead of his chest. Up close, in better light, he could see details he'd missed before. The tall one had a scar along her collarbone, white and old. The middle one's hands were stained green at the fingertips from whatever herb she'd been handling. The youngest had bruises on her wrists, faded to yellow but still visible. You didn't tell them, the middle one said. It wasn't a question, but there was something in her voice that suggested she still couldn't quite believe it. No, Deke said simply. Why not? The tall one's eyes narrowed with suspicion. You don't know us. We're nothing to you. Those men, they work for the most powerful man in 3 territories. You just made an enemy you can't afford to have. Deke leaned against the porch post, feeling the weight of the day settle into his bones. Maybe, but I saw your faces when you heard those horses coming. I've seen fear before. Real fear. The kind that comes from real danger, not imagination. He paused, looking at each of them in turn. And I don't much care for men who hunt women. The youngest one's eyes filled with tears, though she blinked them back quickly. Thank you, she whispered. The tall one wasn't convinced. Gratitude doesn't keep you alive. You should have told them and sent us on our way. Would have been smarter. Probably, Deke agreed. But I stopped doing the smart thing a long time ago. Now I just try to do the right thing. He gestured toward the shack. You 3 have been living here for 6 months, you said. The middle one nodded. In a cave about a mile north. We come to the river to bathe, to get water. We thought nobody would find us here. Preston promised us this land was abandoned, that nobody wanted it. Preston lied to all of us then, Deke said. Sold me land he didn't own. Told you it was safe when it wasn't. He rubbed his jaw, thinking, those men will be back. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but they'll be back. Vaughn doesn't sound like the kind of man who gives up easy. He's not, the tall one said flatly. He's the kind of man who takes what he wants and destroys anyone who gets in his way. Our father worked for him, managed his accounts. When our father died, Vaughn decided we were part of the estate. Said we owed him our labor, our loyalty, our lives. Said we belonged to him, same as the cattle. Deke felt anger coil tight in his chest. No person belongs to another. Tell that to Vaughn, the youngest one said bitterly. The middle one stepped forward, and Deke caught her scent for the first time. Something like sage and river water, and something else he couldn't name. We'll leave tonight. Head further west. It's not fair to bring our trouble down on you. You'll die in the desert, Deke said bluntly. 3 women alone, on foot, with Vaughn's men hunting you. You won't make it a week. Then what do you suggest? The tall one's voice carried an edge of challenge. Deke looked at his shack, at the land he'd bought with everything he had, at the future he'd imagined that was already turning into something he hadn't planned for. I suggest you stay. Let me think on this. There's got to be a way to handle Vaughn that doesn't end with all of us dead or running. The 3 women looked at each other, that silent communication passing between them again. Finally, the middle one spoke. Why would you do this? Risk everything for strangers? Deke met her honey-colored eyes and saw something there that made his heart beat faster. Because maybe I'm tired of being alone, and maybe you 3 deserve a chance to stop running. Night fell over the desert like a heavy blanket. and Deke found himself sitting by a small fire outside his shack, with 3 women whose names he'd finally learned. Ivy, the tall one with the rifle and the sharp tongue. Willa, the middle sister with honey eyes and healer's hands. Daisy, the youngest with freckles and bruises that told stories she didn't speak aloud. They sat in a careful circle, close enough to share the fire's warmth, but far enough apart that no one felt crowded. Ivy kept the rifle across her lap, her eyes scanning the darkness beyond the firelight every few minutes. Willa was mixing something in a small wooden bowl, crushing dried leaves with practiced movements. Daisy sat with her knees drawn up to her chest, staring into the flames with an expression that made her look much older than her years. "How long were you with Vaughn?" Deke asked, feeding another piece of dried wood into the fire. 3 years, Ivy said. "After our father died, Vaughn showed up at our house with papers. Said father owed him money, lots of money. Said the debt passed to us. He gave us a choice, work it off at his ranch, or he'd have the law put us in prison for our father's debts. That's not legal," Deke said. Willa laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. "Legal doesn't matter when you own the sheriff, the judge, and half the territory. Vaughn makes his own laws. What kind of work did he have you doing?" The 3 sisters exchanged glances, and Deke saw pain flicker across their faces. Ivy's jaw tightened. "Everything. Cooking, cleaning, tending his guests. He'd show us off like we were part of his collection, like horses he'd bred for beauty. And when men offered to buy time with us, he'd consider their offers." Deke's hands clenched into fists. "Did he?" "No," Ivy interrupted sharply. "We ran before it came to that. Daisy overheard him making arrangements with a cattle buyer from Colorado, talking about price per girl. We left that night with nothing but the clothes on our backs and this rifle I stole from his study." Daisy spoke for the first time since they'd sat down. "He'll never stop looking. We're his property in his mind. He doesn't let his property walk away." "You're not property," Deke said firmly. "You're people with rights, with lives that belong to you." "Pretty words," Ivy said. "But words don't stop bullets." Willa set aside her wooden bowl and looked at Deke directly. The firelight caught in her eyes, turning them gold. "Why did you really lie to those men today? The truth this time." Deke considered his answer carefully. "I spent 12 years working other men's ranches, doing what I was told, going where I was sent, never having anything that was mine. When I saved enough to buy this land, I thought I'd finally found peace. Thought I'd be alone and that would be enough." He paused, watching the flames dance. "But when I saw you 3 by that river, when I saw the fear in your eyes, I realized something. Being alone isn't the same as being at peace. And sometimes the right kind of trouble is better than the wrong kind of peace." Willa's expression softened slightly, and something passed between them, a current of understanding that made Deke's chest tighten. She held his gaze for a moment longer than necessary before looking away, and he saw the faintest hint of color rise in her cheeks. Ivy broke the moment. "Those scouts will report back to Vaughn. He'll know someone's been here, someone who lied about seeing us. He'll send more men, and they won't be polite about asking questions." "How many men does he have?" Deke asked. 20 at least, Willa said. "Maybe more. All loyal because he pays well and looks the other way when they do things most bosses wouldn't tolerate." "And what about the law? Is there anyone who isn't in Vaughn's pocket?" Ivy shook her head. "The nearest marshal is 3 days' ride north, and even if we made it there, it'd be our word against Vaughn's. We're just 3 women with no proof, no witnesses, nothing but our story. Who do you think they'd believe?" The fire crackled, sending sparks spiraling up into the dark sky. Deke stared at those sparks, watching them disappear into nothing, and made a decision that would change everything. "Then we don't run, and we don't rely on the law. We make Vaughn understand that you're under my protection now, that this land is mine, and anyone who sets foot on it uninvited will answer to me." Daisy's eyes widened. "He'll come here, with all his men. You can't fight 20 armed riders." Deke smiled, though there was no warmth in it. "No, but I can make it costly enough that he'll think twice. And maybe, just maybe, I can find a way to make him leave you alone for good." 3 days passed in tense preparation. Deke worked from dawn until dark, reinforcing the shack's walls with extra planks he found scattered around the property, creating makeshift barriers that could provide cover if shooting started. Ivy helped him, her movements efficient and sure, never wasting energy on unnecessary motion. Willa gathered plants from the surrounding desert, explaining quietly that some could be used for healing wounds, others for making a man sick enough to lose his aim. Daisy kept watch from the roof, her young eyes sharp, scanning the horizon for dust clouds that might signal approaching riders. They worked mostly in silence, but in that silence, something shifted between them. Deke found himself watching Willa as she worked, the way her fingers moved delicately over leaves and stems, the way she tilted her head when she was concentrating. Once, she caught him staring and held his gaze for 3 heartbeats before looking away, a small smile playing at the corner of her mouth. That smile did something to him, made his chest feel tight and loose at the same time. On the 3rd evening, as the sun painted the sky in shades of blood and gold, Daisy called down from the roof. "Riders coming. 7 of them. Moving slow." Deke grabbed his rifle from inside the shack. It was old, had belonged to his father, but he'd kept it clean, and the mechanism still worked smooth. Ivy appeared at his side with her stolen rifle, her face set in hard lines. Willa emerged from the back carrying a bundle wrapped in cloth, and Deke didn't ask what was inside. "Stay behind cover," he told them. "Don't shoot unless I do." "This is our fight too," Ivy said flatly. "It's everyone's fight now," Deke agreed. "But let me talk first. Maybe we can end this without blood." The riders appeared through the heat shimmer, 7 dark shapes that gradually resolved into men on horses. They stopped about 50 yards from the shack, and Deke recognized the scarred man from before. But this time, there was another man riding at the front, and Deke knew without being told that this was Malachi Vaughn. Vaughn sat his horse like a king surveying his kingdom. He was older than Deke expected, maybe 50, with silver threading through his dark hair, and a face that might have been handsome if not for the cruelty living in every line. He wore clothes that cost more than most men earned in a year, and his saddle gleamed with silver fixtures that caught the dying light. "You must be the man who bought Preston's worthless land," Vaughn called out, his voice carrying easily across the distance. "I'm told you've seen some women. My women. I'd like them back." Deke stepped forward, making sure Vaughn could see the rifle in his hands. "Haven't seen any women that belong to you. Only seen 3 free women who have every right to be here." Vaughn smiled, and it was the smile of a snake deciding when to strike. "Free? Is that what they told